Ashley, darling, we have a little surprise for you. My father's voice boomed through the microphone, cutting through the low hum of conversation in the ballroom. He stood on the stage, the city lights of Chicago twinkling behind him, through the 60-story glass windows I had designed. Beside him stood my sister, Brittany, looking radiant and expectant in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. I smiled, raising my champagne glass, assuming this was about the award I'd just received for sustainable architecture. But then he continued. Tonight, as a wedding gift to her sister, Ashley has generously decided to sign over the deed to her penthouse to Brittany. The room erupted in applause. 30 guests, the city's elite, clapped for my generosity. I stood frozen, my smile stiffening into a mask. The glass stem felt cold and fragile in my hand. He hadn't asked me, he was announcing it. He was mugging me in plain sight, using an audience of millionaires as his weapon. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the most audacious thing a family member has ever demanded from you? I want to know. I'm not the only one who has faced this. The applause washed over me like static, a deafening white noise that drowned out the string quartet. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, watching my father beam at the crowd, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. He was good at that. He was good at playing the architect of our family's success, even though he hadn't drawn a single blueprint in a decade. I looked at Brittany. She was glowing, clutching her fiancé's hand, soaking up the admiration. They called her a free spirit. That was the family brand. Brittany was the wild, creative soul who couldn't be tethered by schedules or budgets. And I was the foundation. The cold, unfeeling concrete that held them up so they could touch the sky. They didn't love the foundation. They just expected it to hold the weight. For years, I had been the silent partner in their delusion. When my father's investments turned into sinkholes, I filled them with my salary. When Brittany's lifestyle brand racked up 6 figures in credit card debt, I paid the bills so she wouldn't face a lawsuit. I had paid $85,000 for this party tonight. I had hired the caterers, approved the floral arrangements, and designed the lighting. I had built the stage they were standing on, and now they were using it to execute me. The penthouse wasn't just an asset. It was a $4.8 million property, yes. But to me, it was the only square footage on Earth that didn't belong to them. It was my sanctuary. I had designed every inch of it, from the floor to ceiling windows that framed the lake, to the quiet, soundproofed study where I actually did the work that paid for their lives. It was the one place where I wasn't Ashley the ATM, or Ashley the fixer. I was just Ashley. And now, Robert wanted to take that too. He didn't just want my money anymore, he wanted my safe house. People often ask why women like me stay, why we don't just walk away when the first check clears or the first insult lands. It's not because we are weak, it's because we are trained. It is a prison without bars. You grow up believing that your value is entirely transactional. You believe that if you just give enough, build enough, fix enough, eventually the balance sheet will tip in your favor. You think you can buy their love if you just pay a high enough price. I had spent 29 years paying that price. I had audited my own needs out of existence to make room for theirs. I had convinced myself that being useful was the same thing as being loved. But looking at my father's expectant smile, seeing the entitlement etched into my sister's face, I finally saw the ledger clearly. There was no debt. I didn't owe them this. They had been overdrafting my soul since I was a child, and they were never, ever going to pay me back. Come on, sweetheart, don't be shy. Robert extended his hand, palm open, waiting for the metaphorical keys. He was smiling that practiced, shark-like grin he used when closing a deal, the one that said, I win, you lose, and you're going to thank me for it. The room held its breath. I could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes pressing against my skin. They were waiting for the good daughter to perform. They were waiting for the architect to smooth over the awkwardness, to laugh it off, to say something gracious about family and sacrifice. They expected me to do what I had always done, pour myself into the cracks to keep their facade from crumbling. I looked at Brittany. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the diamond ring on her finger, twisting it in the light, already mentally redecorating my living room. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as an inventory list, a resource to be harvested. If I handed over this property, it wouldn't be the end, it would be the precedent. Next year it would be my stock portfolio. The year after, my retirement fund. I looked back at my father. His hand was still out, unwavering. He was so sure of me. He had built his entire self-image on the certainty of my submission. No, I said. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a whisper. It was just a word, flat and heavy as a stone dropping into a well. Robert blinked. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. "Excuse me?" he laughed, a nervous, barking sound. "I think the champagne has gone to your head, darling," I said. "I heard you," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. And I said no. I am not giving my home to Brittany. Not tonight. Not ever. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. The investors shifted in their seats. The waitstaff froze. The illusion of the happy, wealthy, generous family shattered in real time. Robert's face turned a mottled, ugly red. I saw the panic flare in his eyes, not anger, but pure, unadulterated terror. I had just humiliated him in front of the very people whose money he needed to survive. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a hiss meant only for me. "You ungrateful little bitch. Fix this, now." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked him dead in the eye. "It's over, Robert." The mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. His arm moved before I could register the threat. It was a blur of motion. A release of decades of entitled rage. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a gunshot in the quiet ballroom. My head snapped to the side. The impact burned across my cheekbone, hot and stinging. I felt my pearl earring rip loose, flying from my ear. It arced in the air, catching the light for a brief second, before colliding with the champagne tower, crystal shattered. Glass rained down onto the marble floor. I stood there, tasting copper in my mouth. The room gasped as one entity. But in that frozen moment, as the shockwave rolled through the crowd, something strange happened inside me. The fear evaporated. The hurt vanished. I looked at my father. He was breathing hard, his hand still raised, his chest heaving. And I finally saw him. I saw the truth. We often mistake the narcissist's rage for strength. We think their violence, their shouting, their demands are signs of power, but they aren't. They are symptoms of starvation. Standing there with my cheek throbbing, looking at this man who was shaking not from adrenaline but from dread, I realized he wasn't a titan, he was a parasite, and parasites are terrified of the host. He wasn't hitting me because he was strong. He was hitting me because he was empty. He had no money, no talent, no legacy. He only had me. He had built a castle on my back. And I had just stood up. His violence wasn't an act of dominance. It was the frantic, flailing panic of a man watching his only source of oxygen walk out the door. He didn't own me. He needed me, and that need was his weakness. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I slowly raised my hand and touched the burning skin on my cheek. It felt hot, alien, like it belonged to someone else. I looked at the broken glass on the floor, the shards glittering under the chandeliers I had hand-picked from a catalog in Milan 3 years ago. Robert was waiting. He was waiting for the tears. He was waiting for the apology, or the breakdown that would allow him to swoop in, play the magnanimous forgiver, and guide me back into the fold of submission. He expected me to crumble because he had spent 29 years weakening the structural integrity of my self-worth. But he had made a critical calculation error. He thought he was hitting his daughter. He forgot he was hitting the architect of the very building he was standing in. I turned around. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at my mother, who was covering her mouth with a trembling hand but staying silent, as always. I didn't look at Brittany, who was staring at the floor, probably already worrying about how this would affect her follower count. I simply turned my back on them. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only noise in the room. Click, click, click. It was a metronome counting down the end of their era. I walked past the frozen waiters, past the gaping investors, and pushed through the heavy double doors. The corridor outside was cool and quiet. The air conditioning hummed with a frequency I knew by heart because I had calibrated the HVAC specs myself. I walked to the elevators, my breathing steady, my pulse slowing down to a resting rhythm. The panic was gone. The hurt was packed away, in a box labeled irrelevant data. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady, precise. The hands of someone who draws lines with millimeter accuracy. I didn't open my contacts. I didn't call the police. I opened an app that no one else in that ballroom had. It was the master control interface for the skyscraper's building management system. It was a failsafe I had coded into the security infrastructure during construction, a backdoor for the lead architect in case of emergency system failures. Or, in case of a hostile takeover. I scanned my retina. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Level 5. Administrator. I scrolled past the lighting controls and the temperature settings. I found the tab marked Security Protocols. My finger hovered over a command labeled Priority Lockdown Sector 4. Sector 4 was the ballroom. I pressed it. On the screen, a status bar loaded. Initiating. Inside the ballroom, the music would be cutting out right now. The ambient lighting would shift from gala warmth to security bright. The high-speed service elevators would be grounded. The main doors would remain unlocked. I wasn't kidnapping them, but the VIP access badges Robert and his team used to override the building's systems were now digital paperweights. I wasn't a daughter running away from home anymore. I was the operator securing a compromised site. I watched the elevator numbers descend. 60, 59, 58. I was leaving the toxicity in the clouds. I was descending back to Earth, back to reality, where actions had consequences and gravity always wins. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, depositing me into the lobby. It was a cavern of marble and silence, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just engineered 60 floors above. The concierge desk was empty. The revolving doors were still. It was just me, and the echo of my own breathing. My phone vibrated in my hand, a relentless, angry buzz. I glanced at the screen. Mother, you have destroyed this family. Go back upstairs and apologize right now. Brittany is hysterical. Brittany, I hate you. You're just jealous because Dad loves me more. Give me my house back. I stared at the messages, the blue light illuminating the dusting of powder on my clutch. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask if my face hurt where he had struck me. They were only concerned with the interruption of the transaction. They were mad because the ATM had not only stopped dispensing cash, but had swallowed their cards. I slipped the phone back into my bag without replying. Silence is a powerful answer. It is the only answer people like them understand. Headlights swept across the glass front of the building, cutting through the Chicago darkness. A long, black limousine pulled up to the curb, moving with the slow, predatory grace of a shark. It wasn't a rental. It was a 1968 Lincoln Continental, pristine and terrifyingly elegant. The driver got out, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump, and opened the rear door. A cane emerged, first ebony wood, with a silver handle shaped like a hawk's head. Then, a hand, thin and veined but steady as stone. Finally, Grandma Patricia stepped out onto the pavement. To the family, Patricia was just Grandma, the quiet old woman who sat in the corner at Thanksgiving, knitting and nodding while Robert boasted about his deals. They thought she was frail. They thought she was senile. They thought she was harmless. They had no idea that she was the chairman of the board. Seeing her standing there under the streetlights, wrapped in a coat that cost more than Robert's yearly salary, I felt a wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't fear of her. It was the vertigo of realizing how close I had come to the edge. If I hadn't made that secret pact with her 3 years ago, tonight would have been my funeral. I remembered the day I found the discrepancies in the company ledger. I had seen the money bleeding out, thousands siphoned into shell accounts linked to my father. I could have gone to the police. I could have confronted him. Instead, I went to the nursing home where Patricia was recovering from hip surgery. I brought the files. I showed her the numbers. I remember her looking at the spreadsheets, her eyes sharpening from cloudy blue to piercing steel. She hadn't been shocked. She had been waiting. She told me, "A smart woman doesn't kill the snake when it's in the grass. She waits until it's on the pavement." She offered me a deal. I would keep the company standing, fix the structural rot, and let Robert believe he was in charge. In exchange, she would protect me when the time came. If I hadn't taken that deal, if I had been nice, if I had tried to fix things with love instead of leverage, I would be homeless right now. I would be signing that deed upstairs, crying in the bathroom, believing I had no choice. That terrified me more than the slap. The realization of how fragile my safety really was. Patricia walked through the revolving doors. She didn't look at the architecture, she owned it. She stopped in front of me, her gaze dropping to my red, swollen cheek. Her eyes narrowed, the only sign of emotion she allowed. "Is the site secured?" she asked. Her voice wasn't the wavering tone she used at Christmas. It was low and command-heavy. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Priority lockdown is active, they can't leave until we let them." She nodded once. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer empty comforts. She offered something better. She offered artillery. "Good," she said, adjusting her gloves. "Then let's go up. I have a termination notice to deliver." The elevator ride back up to the 60th floor felt different. It wasn't the slow descent of escape. It was the rapid ascent of judgment. The doors opened with the same soft chime, but the ballroom felt like a different planet. The priority lockdown had shifted the lighting to a stark, cold white security mode. The music was gone. The guests were murmuring, huddled in groups, their expensive clothes looking garish under the harsh lights. Robert was pacing near the stage, shouting into his phone, presumably trying to find out why the service elevators were locked. Brittany was sitting on a chair, sobbing into her hands, while my mother patted her back uselessly. When Patricia walked in, the room fell silent. It wasn't polite silence. It was the silence of prey, sensing a predator. She didn't use a microphone. She didn't need one. She walked to the center of the room, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the marble. I stood beside her, not as a granddaughter, but as her second in command. "Robert," Patricia said. Her voice carried effortlessly. My father spun around. When he saw her, his face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. "Patricia? What are you doing here?" He tried to laugh, a desperate, hollow sound. "Mother, this is a private family celebration. You should be resting." "This is not a family celebration," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster. "This is a corporate function held on company property, and as the chairman of the board, I am here to conduct an unscheduled performance review." The words "chairman of the board" hit the room like a physical blow. The investors' men who had shaken Robert's hand an hour ago straightened up. They knew that title. They knew who really signed the checks. Robert stammered. "I don't know what Ashley told you, but she's hysterical. She's ruining Brittany's night." "Ashley didn't tell me anything," Patricia said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. She tossed it onto the nearest table. It landed with a heavy thud. "The forensic accounting team told me everything." She turned to the guests, her gaze sweeping over them. "My son-in-law, Robert, has led you to believe he is a developer. He is not. He is a mid-level project manager I hired out of pity 20 years ago." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brittany looked up, her mascara streaked. "Grandma, what are you saying?" "I am saying," Patricia continued, relentless, "that for the last 5 years, your father has been embezzling corporate funds to finance your lifestyle, Brittany. The cars, the trips, this party, it was all paid for with stolen money. Money that belongs to the shareholders." She pointed a gloved finger at Robert. The gift of the penthouse wasn't generosity. It was a liquidation attempt. He was trying to transfer the deed to hide assets before the quarterly audit next week. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Robert looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to save him one last time, but I just stood there, watching the man who had slapped me dissolve into a puddle of fear. "You're fired, Robert," Patricia said. The words were simple, final, effective immediately. "Your access badges have been revoked. Your accounts are frozen, and you have exactly 5 minutes to vacate this building before I have security remove you for trespassing." She checked her watch. "The clock started when I walked through that door. You have 4 minutes left." The room descended into chaos. Not the loud, boisterous chaos of the party, but the frantic, panicked chaos of people, realizing their reality had just evaporated. 5 minutes? Robert gasped, his face draining of color. Patricia. Please. Let's talk about this. We're family. No, Patricia said, her voice like iron. We are a corporation. And you are a liability. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. Ashley, do you want to press charges for the assault? The question hung in the air. I looked at Robert. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room. Searching for an ally. For an escape. For anything. He looked small. Pathetic. The man who had terrorized my childhood, who had made me feel like I was nothing without his approval, was now begging for mercy. And then I looked at Brittany. She was slumped in her chair, mascara running down her cheeks. Her dream wedding dissolving along with her father's career. She looked at me, not with anger, but with fear. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the money tap had been turned off. No, I said, my voice calm. I don't need to press charges. Are you sure? Patricia asked, her gaze unwavering. I'm sure, I said. Watching him lose his kingdom is punishment enough. Robert let out a sob, a broken, defeated sound. He tried to reach for me, but security guards were already flanking him. Ashley, please, he whimpered, as they escorted him towards the service elevators. I'm your father. You were my father, I corrected him softly. Now, you're just a former employee. As the doors closed behind him, a strange hush fell over the room. The investors were already pulling out their phones, making calls, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. My mother was weeping quietly into a napkin. Brittany was staring blankly at the floor. But I felt light. The weight I had carried for 29 years, the burden of being the fixer, the builder, the foundation, was gone. Weeks later, I stood in my penthouse, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of diamonds against the dark water of the lake. It was quiet, peaceful. The legal battles were ongoing, but they were the company's problem, not mine. Robert was facing charges for embezzlement. Brittany was being sued by creditors for her unpaid debts. My mother had moved into a small apartment, forced to confront a life without the cushion of my father's lies. I wasn't the architect of their downfall. I was just the architect who finally stopped propping up the ruins. I walked to my dresser and picked up the pearl earring. A cleaner had found it under a table the next morning and returned it to me. I held it up to the light, admiring its luster. It was a little scratched, a little imperfect, but still beautiful. I placed it in a small velvet box, right next to my design awards. It wasn't jewelry anymore, it was a trophy. A reminder that I had survived the demolition. I turned away from the window and walked into my study. My drafting table was covered in blueprints for a new project, a community center in a neighborhood that desperately needed investment. Real work. Meaningful work. I sat down and picked up my pencil. The blank page stared back at me, full of possibility. This was my demolition day. If you're currently holding up the weight of a toxic family, maybe it's time you let the roof collapse. Share this story if you believe in saving yourself first. And tell me, what is the one boundary you need to set today?